CBS 2 News streams here. CBS News Chicago.
Cutting the cord on cable? Stream CBS 2 News live every day on CBS News Chicago. Stream us when you need us. CBS 2 News is always streaming on CBS News Chicago.
Committed to telling your stories. CBS 2.
The latest breaking news, first alert weather, and more streaming on CBS News Chicago.
Keeping you safer, sooner. CBS 2 First Alert Weather. CBS 2 News streams here. CBS News Chicago.
Cutting the cord on cable? Stream CBS 2 News live every day on CBS News Chicago.
Good morning and welcome to COPA headquarters here at 1650. Invited you all to make a public statement regarding a recent investigation. And
stream us when you need us. CBS 2 News is always streaming on CBS News Chicago.
Committed to telling your stories. CBS 2.
First, we're going to have remarks by Alderman COPA, who is the Alderman of the First Ward. Following him, Kersten, administrator of COPA, will provide an update. And then I believe as Director of Youth Affairs, Jen Rotner has already made mention, then we will open it up for questions. She will open it up as well as our last questions.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good morning. My name is Daniel Espada, and spelled D-A-N-I-E-L-L-A-S-P-A-T-A. Really proud to serve as Alderman First Ward, where we are now, home to many street departments, including COPA. And I'm here because not only are we in this ward, but I'm really proud to help represent Essentials. I am really proud of the generosity and hospitality and welcoming that our government and all Chicagoans have shown to newcoming families and residents. But part of that commitment to Essential is a commitment to securing truth, establishing trust with our new residents, with our officers, and taking every allegation, like we're going to discuss today, seriously. And with that, I'm very happy to introduce Chief Administrator Andrea.
Right before Chief Kersten comes, also joining us is Deputy Chief Charlie Jackson,
Thank you and good morning. I am here today to provide an update into the investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct in the 10th District against members of the migrant community by various Chicago Police Department members. There has been an unprecedented amount of media attention and public scrutiny surrounding these allegations, which warrants an open and transparent communication from COPA about the current state of our investigation. And with that, I'm prepared to lay out the timeline of events and facts as we currently know them. On the evening of Thursday, July 6, 2023, COPA received information regarding an allegation of sexual misconduct involving at least one officer assigned to the 10th District of the Chicago Police Department. The allegation identified a specific officer, accused him of sexual contact with an unidentified underage female migrant, and indicated that several other unidentified officers from the 10th District may have also engaged in similar misconduct. Upon receiving this information, COPA staff assigned to our Special Victims Unit reached out to CPD's Bureau of Internal Affairs, BIA, to inquire whether they had an open investigation into this matter or were otherwise aware of these allegations. The source of the initial allegation was unknown, but the information appeared to be circulating amongst various CPD and Office of Emergency Management and Communication, or OEMC, employees. Later that evening, on July 6th, 2 log numbers were generated for this incident. Log numbers are the unique tracking numbers assigned to all open investigations into CPD misconduct. One log number was for COPA's administrative investigation, and the other was for BIA's potential criminal investigation should a victim of sexual assault be identified. Since receiving notification of this allegation, COPA has been working to substantiate whether these allegations in fact occurred, as well as to identify the source of the initial allegation. This investigation remains open and ongoing, but I can confirm that to date, we have not identified any migrants claiming to be the victim of sexual assault or any form of sexual misconduct by CPD members. Given the severity of this allegation, COPA has allocated significant resources to the investigation of this incident. COPA's investigation, which is being led by our Special Victims Squad, has included a total of 10 investigators, 2 supervising investigators, 1 director of investigations, and 2 deputy chief administrators. Many of these staff have expertise in sexual misconduct investigations, and many are fluent in Spanish. Additionally, COPA has worked with staff from the Department of Family Support Services, DFSS, OEMC, CPD, and various community advocates and aid providers to obtain detailed information about migrant housing, tracking, and identifying information. COPA's investigative efforts have included canvassing 14 migrant shelters, direct outreach to members of the migrant community, both in person and via text messages sent by community groups who have ongoing relationships with the migrant community, as well as conversations and interviews with any individuals who have been identified or come forward as potentially having information about these allegations. The scope of our investigative efforts has been broad and has also resulted in a small number of additional complaints involving migrants, including one other allegation of unidentified officers engaging in sexual misconduct involving an unknown migrant in the 19th District. Similar to the allegations regarding the 10th District, COPA has been working to substantiate whether these allegations in fact occurred and to identify any potential victims. Throughout the course of this investigation, COPA has provided regular updates to BIA, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and the FBI regarding the status of our investigation. Having set forth the timeline of events and the facts as we currently know them, I'd also like to take this opportunity to further explain COPA's role in the investigative process. COPA is the independent civilian agency that conducts administrative investigations into allegations of police misconduct that fall within our jurisdiction. Although we are not sworn law enforcement officers and do not conduct criminal investigations, we do work closely with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, CPD's Bureau of Internal Affairs, and at times the FBI and Department of Justice when incidents under our jurisdiction include potential criminal conduct. COPA has express jurisdiction over administrative sexual misconduct investigations, which is a requirement of the federal consent decree. Sexual misconduct, as defined by our ordinance and the consent decree, includes any and all acts of unwanted sexual behavior, such as sexual advances, harassment, and up to and including acts of penetrative sexual assault. COPA takes our responsibility to handle these sensitive investigations extremely seriously. Our dedication to this issue is demonstrated by the establishment of our Special Victims Squad. This team of investigative staff members have significant experience conducting sexual misconduct investigations, criminal prosecution of sex crimes, and advocacy on behalf of survivors of sexual violence. These investigators have received extensive training from local and national experts in the field, including trauma-informed interview techniques. And COPA also maintains a strong relationship with a broader gender-based violence advocacy community here in Chicago. When an allegation of sexual misconduct includes potential criminal acts, there are parallel criminal and administrative investigations in which COPA's Special Victim Squad works directly with CPD's BIA and the and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to conduct joint interviews and to share initial information. This interagency cooperation has been occurring since 2019 and is formalized through a memorandum of understanding between our respective agencies. These partnerships enable us to deliver a victim-centered approach to these investigations while still ensuring COPA's ability to conduct independent investigations and reach factual conclusions based solely on the burden of proof and applicable rules and directives that govern administrative investigations. COPA's findings and recommendations and these and all other investigations are made independently and irrespective of external influence. This principle of independent parallel investigations is also a requirement under the city's consent decree and its various obligations. Under any circumstance, sexual misconduct investigations are complex and sensitive undertakings. There can be profound and sometimes impenetrable barriers which prevent survivors of sexual misconduct from reporting their experiences or participating in our systems of justice. These barriers are often magnified when an act of sexual misconduct is perpetrated by a person in a position of trust, such as a police officer. Because of these challenges, we will continue to take seriously any such allegation and continue to conduct thorough and comprehensive investigations into all such matters. With respect to these allegations involving our migrant community, our investigation remains ongoing, and we ask for the public's patience and participation. If you have any information regarding this or other incidents, please contact our agency. And with that, I will take any questions.
So can we just wait 1 second? I think we're having some issue with the audio stream. So just give us 1 moment to take a couple questions.
Sure.
Sorry, and now, you know what? Go ahead.
Okay.
And just, reminder, if you can, outlet, name, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dana Coswell with Channel 2 News. I'm trying to keep up. You did mention an allegation, a similar allegation involving an officer in the 19th district. Has that been substantiated, or that is also still being investigated, and same issues, and if there's no identification, that sort of thing?
Correct. At this time, we still are working to substantiate whether the acts underlying this allegation in the 19th district in fact occurred, and if so, who any victims of such misconduct are. Those identities are not known.
The original complaint on Mike Krauser, WBBM Radio, the original allegations, that came in anonymously, and how was that done? What can you tell us?
With limited ability to speak very directly about that, given the ongoing nature of our investigation, I will say it was information that came via fellow city employees. So that's how the disclosure was originally made to our department. In the back.
Jim Daly, Southside Weekly. In addition to these investigations and the one of the officer in the 14th, how many investigations does COPA have of officers regarding their behavior towards migrants or volunteers?
So in light of this more recent allegation that we're here talking about today, we actually did sort of a comprehensive review going back to 2022 about how many complaints involving migrants we had received, and there are a couple dozen overall total complaints. The incident involving the 10th district and now the 19th are the only that have any sort of sexual misconduct component to them. Of those couple dozen, around mid-20s complaints that we've received of identified migrants, and again, sometimes we receive anonymous complaints about mistreatment, and if a person doesn't choose to identify themselves as a migrant, or the person making a complaint on their behalf didn't identify them as a migrant, our search would not have been able to capture that information. But of the ones that we were able to confirm did involve potential members of the migrant community, only 2 or 3 of them actually fall under COPA's jurisdiction, and the remaining ones were sent to the Bureau of Internal Affairs for their investigation.
Chief Kersten.
Right here in the blue.
Sean Lewis from WBGM. The 10th district, you had a specific officer named. Can you speak to anything that was done as far as speaking to that officer, their co-workers, and then in the 19th district, was there a specific officer named in that, and what was the outcome of that?
So those investigative steps with respect to the 10th District and a specifically named officer, they're ongoing. So I can't speak with any level of specificity about that, but interviews and investigative work is ongoing with respect to that. As to the 19th District allegation, as I mentioned in my remarks, that was an unidentified officer and also an unidentified migrant victim.
One follow-up to that, and that is the officer, specifically named officer in the 10th, still within police powers and still acting on the streets, or how does it work in this circumstance?
Given what we know in our investigation, I do not have sufficient information with which to make any recommendations relating that officer's duty status to the Chicago Police Department. Any questions as to his duty status or where he's presently assigned, I would direct to CPD.
Have you recommended any change of assignment or police power status?
At this time, we do not have sufficient information to make that recommendation. In the front or in the back, either. Back's fine.
Channel 7. At what point do you close this case? How long do you give it until you say, we can't find victims and we don't know who it is?
There is no bright line. There is no specific end date in sight. I will say that because we are still undertaking these investigative interviews, it depends on what comes out of some of those conversations and investigative steps. But we intend to exhaust all efforts. Part of what our focus has been on is really making sure we understand the broad and interagency and interdisciplinary sort of tapestry of resources that are supporting our migrant community to make sure that the message about who we are, what our role is, and how people can contact us is received by the migrant community. That's been obviously a significant barrier potentially, and so that work is really just as important as the actual interviews and investigative steps that are being undertaken. But so as we proceed, we'll know more about what this timeline ultimately will look like.
Chief, sorry to spell it out. Jessica with ABC7 Chicago. Why provide this update today if all of this is still ongoing and still in flux? Why was it so important for you to come out and talk about this? If you could spell it out for us.
I think that there's been significant public discourse on this allegation and significant scrutiny on what is happening in this investigative process, where things are at. When I came into this role, it was on a promise of taking transparency seriously, and because of the significant amount of reporting that this high-profile incident has generated, and the fact that we have over 5,000 migrants here in the city that we are seeking to care for, I want to make sure that I'm being open and transparent within the bounds of what I can do, maintaining our investigative process, to communicate with the public what is taking place in this investigation.
And just to clarify, the allegations in the 10th, no victims have been identified and no other officers have been.
That's correct.
And that the complaints came from, you said, unidentified city employees or anonymous sources?
The complaints were brought to our attention by other city employees, and
have you identified those city employees?
I don't want to speak too much about the investigation that's still, the portions of it that are remaining very much ongoing, but we did receive notification from other city employees about this allegation. Yes.
Tom Schiavo with Chicago Sun-Times. Do you fear that this sets a precedent, essentially, that in high-profile cases you guys will be forced to come and step before the media and say a high-profile police shooting or things like that, where in the past, the investigation has proceeded much longer before you've done this?
I don't fear any such precedents. We have, under my tenure as chief administrator, been more open and transparent in our process with the media than what I think Chicagoans are accustomed to from this agency and from those that came before COPA. So we intend to be as transparent as we can be. For your example, an officer-involved shooting, we are continually providing, whether it's written press updates or other forms of notifying the public about investigations, both in the initial stages and then also when things conclude. Obviously, there are rules around when we can disclose certain pieces of information, and we are always seeking to safeguard our investigative process. But when an allegation like this takes hold of the public conversation and discourse in the way that it has in this instance, I think transparency requires us to have this kind of open conversation.
Mary Ann from NBC. So if we could go back to that initial allegation, be transparent. Could this initial allegation have been someone in a personal vendetta trying to smear an officer for a personal reason.
Right, and I don't want to comment on the underlying source of the allegation as yet because the investigation is still ongoing, but we are examining the underlying source of the allegation.
And so that is a possibility?
I can't comment on the outcome of our investigation at this time as it's still ongoing.
And then just one more. Might it be that the migrants are afraid to say what's going on?
I think, as I was stating in my opening remarks, anytime you're investigating an allegation of sexual misconduct, particularly sensitive in nature, particularly involving a potential perpetrator in a position of trust, those are incredibly powerful barriers to people feeling that they can trust a system and come forward and share their experiences. That can only be compounded for members of a migrant community who may have language barriers, may not understand our systems of justice, may not know who COPA is or what we do, and that is why I'm not going to be rushed in the investigation of this process because I want to ensure that we have done every bit of due diligence to provide as much outreach, as much information, and as much education to that very vulnerable community to make sure that we've done all we can to ensure people have a feeling of individual safety in their ability to come to us with an experience that they had.
We know that that the migrants or asylum seekers have been moved from the 10th district. Do you know, a couple things here, do you know if they've been moved from the 19th district? I know the goal is to move all the seekers to a shelter, but do you know if they've been moved from the 19th district? And then also, do you have any indication that there have been any changes made within the police department about setting up parameters between police officer and migrant, association or anything to that effect?
So I would direct your question about where migrants are being housed or have been moved either to City Hall or to CPD specifically to answer that question. One thing that I think is really unique about our agency's authority is we have the ability to make policy recommendations. And so in this investigation, and then to be more clear, policy recommendations to the Chicago Police Department. So in this investigation and in any other investigation, if our investigative outcomes identify gaps in policy, gaps in training, things that could be put in place to prevent similar acts of occurring in the future, we are well within our rights and will certainly take advantage of the opportunity to inform the department if we can identify appropriate policy changes that would have aided this process.
But you're not there yet?
Correct, because the investigation is still ongoing.
Andrea also with WBBM. I was just wondering, the officer, does he have a history of misconduct? Has he been with the force for a long time? What's his past life?
Because we're not identifying this officer at this time, I'm not going to speak about anyone's individual history at this time. But obviously, as the investigation progresses, we will be as full and in the review of all relevant information as we can be.
Forgive me if you've already answered this one. There was a report, besides this one named officer, that there may have been others in the 10th district, and you talked about the 19th. Can you talk about what your investigation has been able to find? Because obviously you're doing this because the public, things started to become its own animal out there in different online social media outlets. Can you talk about what you may have found beyond this one officer? Because there was a report of it, sometimes 4 officers and then another one.
To be very clear, we have not yet identified any individual migrant claiming to either have direct knowledge of or be the victim of any form of sexual misconduct by a member of the Chicago Police Department, to be clear. In the dozens of conversations and interviews that our investigative staff has undertaken, there's been a lot of information provided, some of which has yielded additional complaints, only one other complaint being sexual of nature. That involves the 19th district, as I mentioned. And in the interest of transparency and full reporting on what I can say, we've also encountered a number of members of the migrant community who talk about feeling safe in police departments and appreciating the work of the Chicago police officers that they're interacting with. The migrant community, just like our own, broader Chicago community, people's experiences are their own, and they're not all consistent or the same. So we've certainly talked to people with a wide variety of impressions, experiences, and opinions on this issue, both directly as members of the community as well as people providing aid and support to that community.
Outside of the sexual misconduct complaints, what are some of the nature of some of the other complaints?
Can you name your outlet?
Oh, I'm sorry, I said Sarah Schulte, ABC7.
Without getting too specific, we have some sort of verbal abuse type complaints, things involving people's immigration status, et cetera. There's also some potential Fourth Amendment type violations involving migrants that may have been placed under arrest or detained outside of being in the districts, so things of that nature. But the vast majority of complaints have fallen under a category of jurisdiction that is under the purview of the Bureau of Internal Affairs. So I would direct you to CPD for more specific questions about what some of those cases have been.
Alex LeBlanc from Chicago. So I've been talking to the migrants, and of course in my reporting, some of them have networks outside of the city and outside of the state, and especially if they're living in a police station, if they've had access to those kind of resources, they've moved out of state. Your canvassing of victims of the migrant community, have you expanded outside of the city and outside of the state? Because potentially they could not be in the city at this point.
We are taking all possible paths to pursue contacting as many people as we can with respect to this incident. Our efforts started in the last 2 weeks, which is all that we've had to really start to unwind this allegation, have started here locally in Chicago, but we are aware that obviously the migrants don't necessarily stay here in Chicago, and so we will be exploring all possible options if we can identify leads that bear pursuing.
Have you
Just a
talked
couple
to Chief
more
Talley?
questions.
Have you talked to Chief Talley? Is there a reason why she wasn't here today?
You'd have to direct that question to the Chicago Police Department.
Bill Fazio, NBC5. Just Alderman, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more, your reaction now that you've heard all this, and why did you want to be here today?
I wanted to be here today because as an individual alderman, as collectively with the City Council, I feel like it's always important that we affirm the work that COPA is doing. I trust their work. I feel like it would be a poor choice to leave any investigation in the place of, I don't know. And I know in the absence of clear and accurate information, we get what we find on social media. So even when the point of an update like this is to say the investigation is ongoing, I feel like that's helpful in being truthful and putting out trustworthy information. So that's why this was important to me.
Are the accused officers in the two districts men?
We don't have identified officers with respect to all of these allegations, and I don't want to comment any further on the identity of anyone that we do have with respect to that, as the investigation is still ongoing.
All right. We're all good? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, I've been getting a lot of messages that the sound was not working for